Hello everyone, and welcome back to Star Gossip. Tonight, we journey far north, into the frozen wilderness of Alaska, a land of breathtaking beauty, but also of unspeakable darkness. Behind the quiet streets and snow-covered rooftops of small towns lie secrets that chill to the bone. These are not legends. These are disturbing true stories, whispered by the cold wind and buried deep in the ice. So brace yourself as we unravel 5 of the most haunting small-town horror stories from the last frontier. Story 1. The Vanishing of Port Chatham. Port Chatham, perched at the southern tip of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, was once a bustling fishing town. Its waters teemed with salmon in the summer months, and the surrounding forests provided timber for cabins and canneries. Families laughed in the evenings, fishermen boasted of their catches, and children played along the frozen shoreline, their footprints crisscrossing the snowy banks. But the town's prosperity came with a fragile edge. Port Chatham was remote, isolated by miles of rugged terrain and icy waters, and the wilderness surrounding it was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Wolves prowled the outskirts and bears were common in the forests. Yet locals swore that the greatest threat was not of this world. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. A hunter went missing in early winter, far beyond the limits of the town, and was never found. A fisherman failed to return after a morning trip. His boat discovered adrift with nothing inside. At first, the residents attributed the disappearances to natural accidents. The icy waters, blinding snowstorms, or treacherous cliffs. But soon, the pattern became undeniable. Bodies began appearing under circumstances so disturbing that even the hardiest of Alutiiq men shivered at the sight. Men and women were discovered torn apart in the woods, their wounds precise yet brutal, as if inflicted by an unseen, inhuman hand. Bloodied footprints, far too large for a human, were often found nearby, pressed deep into the soft snow. Elder residents whispered the name of the Nantiinak, a creature older than memory, a towering, hair-covered being, part man, part beast, that hunted those who strayed too far from safety. By the mid-1940s, Port Chatham was teetering on the brink. Families that could leave did so, abandoning homes, boats, and canneries to decay under relentless storms. Yet some stubborn souls remained, convinced the disappearances were exaggerated or that courage could protect them. One such family, the Jensens, refused to leave. Lars Jensen, a fisherman with weathered hands and a stubborn grin, insisted the town had survived for decades and would survive him. His wife, Ingrid, feared the woods, but followed her husband's lead, and their 2 children, Eric and Freya, accepted life in isolation as normal. But that winter, the Jensens would learn the true horror of Port Chatham. It began one night as a blizzard swept the town. The wind howled across the bay, rattling windows and whistling through the gaps in the Jensen cabin. Lars had gone out early that morning to check the nets, and by evening he had not returned. Ingrid tried to maintain calm, but the darkness pressed against her chest like a weight. The children shivered under blankets, their eyes wide. Suddenly there was a knock, then another. At first Ingrid thought it was the wind, but the knocks grew deliberate, measured, as though someone or something was circling the cabin. Eric and Freya clutched her skirts, whispering that they could see a tall figure outside, pale against the swirling snow. Ingrid's heart hammered. "It's just the snow," she whispered. But her own voice trembled. She grabbed a lantern and opened the door a crack. Nothing. Only the swirling storm and tracks, massive, barefooted impressions leading away into the black forest. The family tried to sleep, but the noises persisted. The dragging of feet across the frozen ground, low guttural growls, the occasional crack of a branch snapping. At dawn, Lars still had not returned. Fear had replaced hope. They knew the tracks outside were not his. The next few days were a blur of terror. Each morning, they would find new tracks circling the cabin, sometimes stopping just inches from the door before vanishing. Supplies began to run low, and Ingrid realized the family could not survive on courage alone. One evening, Freya awoke to the sound of whispering. Small, unintelligible words, almost human, carried in the wind. She crept from the bed to the window and saw the silhouette of a massive figure, hunched and dripping with ice, watching them from the tree line. Its eyes gleamed faintly in the twilight, and its long, clawed fingers scraped against the snow. She screamed. Ingrid rushed in, gathering the children, but when they returned to the window, the figure was gone. The tracks in the snow ended abruptly, as if it had melted into the earth. The Jensens were not the only ones to experience such horrors. Across Port Chatham, other remaining families reported the same nightly terror. Shadows in the woods that moved independently of the wind, mutilated wildlife left as warning, and the sensation of being observed even indoors. Each disappearance brought more dread, until the town became untenable. Finally, in early spring, Ingrid packed what little they could carry and left with her children. Lars, however, was never found. Some say he went out one morning to check the nets and was taken by the Nantinak. Others believe he succumbed to the cold, but the children, now grown, swear they saw a massive figure at the edge of the forest, watching their mother leave. Its eyes followed them until the trees swallowed it again. By the 1950s, Port Chatham was entirely abandoned. The canneries rusted, the cabins collapsed, and the streets disappeared beneath snow and moss. Modern explorers occasionally visit, driven by curiosity or thrill-seeking. Many do not last the night. They report footsteps circling tents, guttural growls in the distance, and the constant suffocating sensation of being watched. The Nantinak, if it is real, has become a legend woven into the bones of Port Chatham. But the stories are not just tales, they are warnings. The town stands as a testament to isolation, fear, and the unknown. And those who dare step into its ghostly ruins may find that the wilderness is not empty, and some horrors do not forget. For Port Chatham, the wilderness has always been patient, and it is still waiting. Story 2. The Blackout in Shishmaref. Shishmaref is a fragile ribbon of land perched on a barrier island in the Chukchi Sea, far north of the Bering Strait. Its homes lean against the constant wind, its wooden piers groan under the weight of snow and ice, and the residents live under the perpetual threat of erosion, storms, and sea tides that slowly devour the island itself. Life here is already a battle against nature. But in the winter of 2005, the true terror of Shishmaref would reveal itself, not from the sea, but from the darkness. It began during a particularly fierce snowstorm in late December. The wind whipped across the island with a biting, almost sentient ferocity, rattling windows and howling through gaps in the siding. The village generator, already old and overworked, froze in the extreme cold. By mid-afternoon, Shishmaref was completely cut off from electricity. No lights glimmered in homes, no radio signals crackled through, and the few street lamps flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the village like a living thing. At first, the residents shrugged it off. They had lived without power before. Candles were lit, oil lamps were placed in windows, and families huddled together for warmth. But as night fell, the stillness became heavy, almost suffocating. Snow drifted silently across the empty streets, and shadows deepened in unnatural ways. Then the whispers began. At first it was almost imperceptible, a soft rustling, faint footsteps outside a door. Old Mrs. Akuluk, who had lived on the island her entire life, swore she heard voices speaking her name in the snow. Aluk, Aluk, they called, carried on the wind. She peered out her frosted window, seeing only the storm, but the sound of footsteps circling her home would not stop. Soon, children reported seeing figures in the darkness. Tall, thin shapes that slipped between homes like they were gliding on the wind itself. One boy claimed that a figure appeared at his window, its face pale and elongated, eyes that reflected the flickering candlelight like frozen ice. When he screamed, the figure vanished, leaving only a scratch on the frost-covered glass. The villagers organized watches, pairing up to patrol the streets. They carried torches and knives, but every patrol returned shaken. They described footprints in the snow, bare and massive, far larger than any human foot, moving in impossible patterns, sometimes crossing doors and walls, then disappearing without a trace. One young man, Igaluk, swore he saw a shadow crouched on the roof above him, watching silently as he walked. He raised his torch, and it jumped down into the darkness, vanishing into the storm. Families barricaded themselves indoors. Parents comforted children, whispering assurances they didn't believe themselves. The storm raged outside, wind screaming, snow swirling like a living shroud. And through it all, the voices grew louder, more insistent, as though the darkness itself was speaking. On the third night, the storm reached its peak. The village generator finally sputtered back to life, flickering weakly, and some street lamps illuminated the streets for the first time in days. What they revealed froze the villagers' hearts. In the snow near homes, strange marks remained, footprints leading to doors and windows, often stopping abruptly, as if the creatures had vanished mid-step. Drag marks, deep grooves in the ice, suggested something large had been pulled across the ground. And the local dogs, usually fearless and protective, cowered, refusing to leave their kennels. Elders of the village, who had grown up with oral traditions of spirits and unseen beings, began to whisper about the Tornariat, shadowy creatures of the Arctic night, said to prey on those caught alone in darkness. They were neither human nor fully animal, entities that fed on fear and isolation, drawn to the helpless. Even after the power returned and the storm subsided, life in Shishmaref had changed. Children refused to go outside after dark, and adults moved cautiously, always scanning the snow for movement that shouldn't exist. Some families claimed that the shadow figures followed them for weeks, appearing just beyond the edge of the tree line or vanishing into the dark waters of the lagoon. Igaluk, the young man who had seen the shadow crouching on his roof, later confessed that for days after, he would wake to scratching at his windows and faint whispers calling his name. He became obsessed with checking the snow outside, counting footprints, trying to rationalize what he had seen. But rational thought failed him, because no human could have made the tracks he measured in the snow. The stories of that blackout became legend. They are not merely tales of a winter storm, but warnings. In Shishmaref, darkness is not empty. It waits, it watches, and it remembers. Even today, locals tell children never to wander outside during a power outage. They speak in hushed tones of the night in 2005, when the village vanished into shadow. Those who ignore the warnings sometimes do not return. And the whispers? They are said to still linger on the wind, calling to anyone who dares to step into the snow-covered streets alone, drawing them into the cold embrace of the Arctic night. Because in Shishmaref, the darkness is alive, patient and hungry. Story 3. The Whispers of Whittier Tunnel. Whittier is a town unlike any other in Alaska. Nearly the entire population, just over 200 people, lives inside a single 14-story concrete monolith called Begich Towers. The building contains apartments, a post office, a church, a school, and even a grocery store, Residents jokingly call it the city in a building, but outsiders find it unnerving. Corridors stretch endlessly, stairwells echo with strange noises, and the dense concrete walls trap every whisper, every footstep, amplifying the sense of claustrophobia. Yet the strangest and most feared feature of Whittier is not its towering building. It's the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, the only land route in and out of the town. The tunnel stretches more than 2 miles through solid mountain, wide enough for a single lane of alternating traffic and dark enough to swallow a vehicle whole if the lights fail. Those who have driven it at night speak of a weight, an oppressive presence that seems to follow travelers through its twisting stone corridors. It was late November when Daniel Ortiz, a long-haul trucker, arrived in Whittier to deliver supplies for the grocery store in Begich Towers. The sky was overcast, and snow flurries obscured the entrance to the tunnel. Daniel had driven the route before, but tonight something felt wrong. The wind howled outside like a living creature, and a faint mist clung to the tunnel entrance. He shrugged off the feeling, chalking it up to fatigue. About halfway through, Daniel's truck began to sputter. Smoke curled from the engine, and the headlights dimmed. The tunnel walls stretched around him, dark and unyielding. He switched on his hazards and tried the radio. Silence. No signal, only the echo of his own breathing and the faint hum of the truck's engine. That's when he heard it. A whisper, low, almost inaudible, coming from deep in the tunnel. He froze. Daniel. His pulse quickened. He shook his head. It had to be a trick of the wind. But the whisper returned, clearer, closer. Daniel, come. He turned on the cab lights, scanning the tunnel. Nothing. Just the gray stone walls, slick with condensation, stretching endlessly ahead and behind. But he felt it, eyes on him. Something moving just beyond the glow of his headlights. The hairs on his arms stood on end. Minutes passed. Then came a faint scratching, like nails against stone. Daniel stepped out of the truck, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in his hand. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, twisting with every flicker of light. He called out, but his voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the tunnel. The scratching grew louder. Daniel swung the flashlight, and for a split second, he saw a figure, tall, thin, impossibly still, crouched at the edge of the light. Its eyes reflected the beam, black and endless. He blinked. It was gone. Panicking, he jumped back into the truck. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. He pressed forward, driving faster than safety allowed, and the whispering returned. Hundreds of voices overlapping, calling names, mocking him, promising him to the tunnel. When he finally emerged into the light outside Whittier, Daniel stopped the truck, trembling. He looked back at the tunnel entrance. For a moment, he thought he saw movement inside, a dark mass, standing and watching him leave. He drove the rest of the way in silence, ignoring the snow and wind, barely acknowledging the small-town residents who waved him in. Locals, when asked about the tunnel, often shrug or glance nervously at the mountains. "It listens," one man says quietly. "And it remembers." Children are warned never to walk through it alone, especially at night. Truckers who break down inside often report scratches on their vehicles, claw-like grooves along metal panels, deep and jagged, with no logical cause. Some swear they see shadow figures pacing just out of reach of headlights, or feel unseen hands brush against their shoulders. A few have claimed that when they were stuck, the air inside the tunnel suddenly became impossibly cold, and whispers spoke to them in a language they could not understand, urging them to abandon the vehicle and step into the darkness. The tunnel has its own legend. Some say it was carved over ancient lands, places that were never meant to be disturbed. Others whisper of spirits, angry, old, and hungry for life. that dwell in the stone corridors, waiting for travelers who stray too long. There are even those who claim the tunnel itself is alive, a sentient artery feeding off fear and isolation. Despite these tales, the tunnel remains the only overland route to Whittier. Trucks and vehicles pass through every day, the lights flickering and the walls echoing. Some drivers claim they hear faint whispers, a low moan carried along the stone. They look ahead, expecting nothing, yet feel something there, something patient, waiting. Whittier itself is unnervingly quiet, even with its residents living inside the towering baggage towers. Some evenings, the entire town seems suspended in a muted silence, as if the mountains themselves are holding their breath. Stories circulate among children and elders alike, of travelers who vanished in the tunnel, of lights seen moving through the darkness with no one inside, and of whispering voices that follow a person home. Daniel Ortiz never returned to Whittier after that night. He quit trucking through Alaska altogether. Some say he heard the whispers again in his dreams, calling him back to the tunnel. Others claim he can never forget the feeling of being watched, stalked, trapped by the darkness that knows no bounds. The Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel is just a tunnel, some will say, concrete and stone, a passageway. But the residents of Whittier know differently. They know that in Alaska, darkness has weight. It listens, it remembers, and sometimes it hunts. No matter how many vehicles pass through, the whispers remain, and those who dare enter after nightfall may discover that the shadows are not empty. They are waiting. Story 4. The Kivalina Stranger. Kivalina is a small Inupiat village perched precariously on a narrow strip of land between the Chukchi Sea and a shifting lagoon. Its homes lean against the icy wind, built on stilts to survive the relentless tides. Life is hard here. Winters are long, the sea merciless, and the snow can bury a person in minutes if they stray from the few cleared paths. But the people of Kivalina have always lived in harmony with the land and sea, relying on tradition, skill, and community to survive. That harmony shattered in the winter of 1994. It began with sightings. A man, or something resembling a man, appeared at the edge of the lagoon just beyond the village. He was impossibly tall, gaunt and pale as ice, with long, thin limbs and dark, hollow eyes that reflected no light. At first, villagers thought him a traveler lost to the snow, but as nights passed, he appeared again, always in the same eerie places, near homes, along the frozen river, atop rooftops, standing silently at the edge of the boardwalks. Children were the first to notice him. Some claimed he whispered their names, soft and deliberate, even when no wind blew. Others said he crouched just beyond the lanterns, watching them as they returned from school or play. At night, the sound of scratching, long, deliberate, dragging along wood and ice, echoed through the village, always accompanied by a feeling of being watched. Families tried to rationalize it. Perhaps he was a lost hunter, a drifter from another village, or someone seeking shelter. But no matter how close they approached, the stranger would vanish before they could reach him. There were no tracks in the snow leading to or from him. It was as if he materialized out of the cold itself. The first serious incident occurred in mid-January. An elder woman, Naliak, was awakened in the middle of the night by scratching at her window. When she looked, she saw the stranger pressed against the glass, his hollow eyes staring at her. He did not move, did not speak, but she felt an undeniable sense of malice emanating from him. She screamed, and when her neighbors came running, he had disappeared. Yet the frost on the window had deep claw-like scratches, evidence that he had been there. Panic spread through Kivalina. Parents forced children to sleep together, windows were barricaded, and the village organized nightly watches. Groups patrolled the streets with lanterns and hunting knives, moving slowly and calling out, but they found nothing. Footprints appeared sporadically in the snow, enormous barefoot impressions, sometimes stopping abruptly in the middle of a frozen street. Some of the footprints looked human, others elongated and twisted, like the foot of a giant. One night, a young father, Tikani, decided to confront the stranger. Armed with a torch and his hunting rifle, he followed the figure across the lagoon, wading through waist-deep snow. He kept his eyes locked on the pale form, ready to fire. But as he approached, the figure dissolved, stretching unnaturally and melting into the darkness. Tikani fell to his knees, shivering, realizing that he had chased nothing but shadows and cold air. Over the next weeks, the stranger's presence escalated. Dogs vanished, leaving only trails of blood in the snow. Smoke from chimneys carried strange shadows that seemed to cling to the rooftops. Children whispered about eyes watching them from inside their homes, even when the stranger had supposedly disappeared. The villagers began speaking of the Takriak, an old spirit from Inupiat folklore said to wander between the living and the frozen wastes, feeding on fear and curiosity. By February, the villagers had begun to leave the edges of Kivalina at night, refusing to walk alone. Doors were bolted and windows shuttered, but the stranger continued his silent vigil. One elderly hunter, aware of old legends, warned the village council, "You cannot fight him. He is not of this world. He only wants you to fear." Then, one night, during a violent blizzard, the stranger vanished entirely. Some say he was swept away by the wind, others claim he returned to the frozen sea from which he had emerged. But his absence did not erase the terror he had caused. Families remained vigilant, children no longer played near the lagoon, and even seasoned hunters avoided the edges of town after dark. Years later, elders still tell the story to warn the younger generation. The stranger may return at any time. They whisper that he feeds on fear, and that wandering alone in the long Arctic night could draw his attention. The snowdrifts sometimes appear to move on their own, and footprints that do not belong to any human or animal occasionally appear near the village. For Kivalina, the stranger became more than a legend. He became a symbol of isolation, the unknown, and the dangers that lurk when the world feels too empty. Parents teach children to respect the land and sea, but also to respect the shadows. And when the wind howls across the lagoon, carrying an eerie whisper, the villagers instinctively know he is still out there, waiting. No one who has seen the stranger ever forgets the hollow gaze, the unnatural posture, or the silence that accompanied him. And though years have passed, a lingering fear remains that one day the stranger will return, and Kivalina will once again be gripped by a terror that cannot be explained, fought, or escaped. Story 5. The never-ending scream of Nome Nome is a town that rests on the edge of the Bering Sea, a place where ice meets shore and the wind carries the chill of centuries. Its streets are lined with wooden homes battered by storms, and snow covers the ground for most of the year. In Nome, the cold is not just weather. It is a presence, a force that seeps into your bones, whispering reminders of isolation and mortality. It was in the winter of 1981 that Nome experienced an event that would haunt its residents for decades. David Johnson, a dock worker accustomed to the harsh conditions, was returning home late after a long shift. The streets were deserted, the wind whipping snow in horizontal sheets. Lamps flickered faintly along the boardwalks, casting long, wavering shadows. As David walked, he heard it, a scream. At first, he thought it was the wind carrying some stranded animal's cry. But this was no animal. The sound was human, yet unnatural. It began low, almost mournful, then escalated into a piercing, high-pitched wail that seemed to stretch beyond the limits of the human voice. The scream did not fade. It continued, echoing across the frozen streets and the harbor, impossible to pinpoint. David froze, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The scream seemed to carry memory, pain, and malice all at once. It was a sound that made the blood in his veins turn cold, that forced him to cover his ears in vain. He looked down the street, searching for its source, but saw only the silent, snow-draped homes and the frozen harbor. Footsteps appeared beside him, muffled in the snow. He glanced down and froze. Bare footprints, huge, elongated, tracked alongside him, yet there was no one there. The prints continued across the frozen ground, leading toward the icy water. David's heart pounded as he realized that the scream was coming from that direction, rising from the harbor itself. Desperate, he ran to the nearest home, pounding on doors until someone answered. A family let him inside, bewildered and pale, but the scream followed. They all swore that it seemed louder inside the walls, reverberating through the floorboards. Windows rattled in their frames, and the snow outside shifted as though something large moved beneath it. Over the next few nights, the phenomenon repeated. The scream returned without warning, echoing across Nome, seeming to carry with it the memory of countless vanished souls. Residents noticed footprints appearing overnight, enormous, bare, and always ending at the water's edge, as if the being responsible could walk on snow, ice, and air alike. Dogs refused to leave their kennels, their howls joining the wail. Children trembled at night, claiming to see a figure at the end of the pier, a tall, gaunt silhouette with eyes black as pitch. Some elders whispered of the Kalupalig, an Inuit sea spirit said to drag the unwary beneath the ice. Others claimed it was something else entirely, a creature born of Nome's isolation, of despair and cold, feeding on the fear of those trapped by the relentless Arctic night. Whatever it was, the people of Nome learned one simple rule: never approach the waterfront at night when the wind carries a scream. One night, a small group of young men attempted to investigate. Armed with flashlights and rifles, they trudged through waist-deep snow to the docks. The scream rose before they reached the end of the pier, unbearable, almost deafening. They shone their flashlights into the harbor, but the water was black and still. And then, one of them screamed. His torch fell into the water, extinguishing instantly, and when the others turned, he was gone. Only the footprints remained, leading into the ice where they ended abruptly. After that, the residents of Nome avoided the waterfront entirely after dark. Even decades later, whispers of the scream persisted. Hunters spoke of shadows moving across the ice, always at the periphery of their vision. Travelers reported hearing the same wailing sound, a scream that never seemed to stop, that lingered long after the wind had died down. The authorities investigated some disappearances, but found no evidence of foul play. Bodies were sometimes recovered, mutilated or missing entirely. Nothing could explain the sound, the footprints, or the feeling of being watched that accompanied it. Locals learned to respect the scream as a warning, a reminder of the power of isolation and the unseen dangers of the Arctic. Even today, when the wind carries across Nome, people pause and listen. If the air is perfectly still and the snow drifts in strange shapes, some claim they can hear it. The scream that stretches across decades, calling from beneath the ice, warning all who dare to ignore it. And those who hear it too closely sometimes vanish. For Nome, the scream is more than a legend. It is the voice of the frozen wilderness itself, a sound that embodies fear, mystery, and the inescapable cold. And in Alaska, where the night is long and isolation is total, the scream serves as a reminder. Some horrors cannot be escaped. Some horrors wait, patient and eternal just beneath the surface. The Utah